Hello, guys, and welcome back to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of Bering Sea and beyond. I'm your host, Mark Kaler. And today we have Joe Schmitz, the captain of the Royal Viking, also known as Schmitty. So, Joe, how are you today?
I'm doing great.
Excellent, excellent. Been trying to get you on for the last few weeks. It's, in shipyard and a little busy.
Yeah, we've been pretty busy. Schedules aren't working out. But today they are.
They are.
Yeah.
They are. So let's just start at the beginning. Where were you born and where were you raised?
I was born in Tillamook, Oregon. My family's from Astoria. My dad was actually putting a highway in. I was born down in Tillamook County. Astoria is a coastal town in Oregon, right on the border of the Columbia River. When I was a kid, it was a big salmon town and tuna town, and fishing, just in general, shrimp, bottom fish. Grew up there and started high school. Went to high school there and met Nick Malahowski there. Me and Nick used to terrorize the town on our skateboards and among other things.
Nick's now the co-captain of the Arcturus.
Correct.
Okay.
At the time, his parent owned 3 boats, couple draggers and a shrimper. We used to offload those. I used to offload boats with Nick. Me and him would cut school and go offload a boat while we were in high school. And that's when I decided that's what I wanted to do. My uncle was a gill netter on the Columbia River the whole time I was a kid and fishing salmon. And then he also had a couple of Bristol Bay permits. He'd go up there sometimes. I never went to Bristol Bay with him. But I did go gill netting with him a few times on the Columbia. But early on, I knew when I grew up, I wanted to be a fisherman. It's just that was
which experience. Which one was the one that made you think that was it for you?
Mostly working with Nick on the bigger boats, on his dad's draggers. Just we would do shipyard stuff, help out, fiberglass paint, offloading the boats. I seen what kind of money I was getting for just offloading, and at the time, I mean, that was phenomenal compared to what minimum wage was.
What year was that?
Oh, that would be around 1978.
Okay.
And after high school, I ended up down in California. And shortly after, I ended up back up in Astoria, and I started working on some coast boats. Did a little dragging, some pot fishing, and didn't really like it off the coast.
What was the first boat you were actually on as a crew member?
The first crew member I was on was a boat called Lucky 7 out of Astoria.
And what was she?
It was, at the time, we were pot fishing.
For?
At the time, we were fishing rockfish, and then we ended up doing slime eels. And the boat ended up leaving to go to San Francisco, and I said, I'm not going. And I worked on a dragger there, the Marion F, and for a friend of mine that I worked with some people I went to school with. And then I decided I wanted to go to Alaska because a bunch of my friends were going. And I ended up signed up with Deep Sea Fisheries to go on the Alaska Mist, which is a factory longliner. And I came up here to Seattle to work in shipyard on it over here at Voss. Bill Maxwell, who runs the Dolphin, was the captain at the time. And we had the boat like within a week of ready to go. And one of the crewmen had stole a bunch of stuff from the supplies we were loading on, C-store stuff, got fired, went out, got drunk, came back to the boat, and me and the cook were sleeping on the boat at the time. And he poured 15 gallons of gas on the factory deck and lit the boat on fire.
Oh.
Yeah. I barely got off it. It was the cook was a big guy, climbed out of a porthole, about probably a 12-inch porthole.
Just squeezed out.
He squeezed out. I don't know how he did it. I had to wrap a wet
like
blanket.
Toothpaste coming out of the.
Pretty much. He got out though. It's amazing what
little fire will do.
Yeah, wanting to live.
So did she burn all the way there?
It gutted the whole boat. I barely got off. I had to soak a blanket in the toilet, and run down the passageway to get out the door through fire. And I got off the boat. Everything I had, all my gear was gone. Boat was gutted.
Now it's in dry dock, so it's totally out of the water.
No, we were in the water.
Oh.
It already come out of dry dock, and we were just doing the finishing touches up on it.
Ready to leave.
Yeah, we were loading groceries and C-store stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So they ended up setting me up on the Aleutian Falcon, and I didn't want to go on there because it was just a crab processor. I wanted to go fishing, but they said, well, that's where all we got for you at the moment, so that's where you're going if you want to stay working here. Well, I had no other options at the moment, so I went, and I worked on there for about a month and a half, and they pulled into Akitan to the Trident dock, and they were escorting people off the boat because they wouldn't let you off the boat because they knew you'd find another job back then. There was plenty of them. You could walk the docks and just get, especially if you were a young guy, you could get it scooped up right away.
80s then?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then while they were escorting people up to use the payphone at the Trident plant in Yakutan, I climbed down the stern line and went down to the bar and was hitting the crabbers that just offloaded it to us for a job. And they said, well, we don't have nothing, but you go to Dutch Harbor, you're going to find a job. And I said, okay. And about that time, the foreman walked in, caught me in the bar. Me and another deckhand fired us. I won't tell the whole story. Some things people just, well, he walked up, poked me in the chest, and I dropped him. So I got fired. And the superintendent didn't want to fire me because he goes, you're the best guy I got. I said, well, because I got to, though. So he ended up he goes, I got to fly you to Seattle. We can't leave you in Dutch Harbor or Akitan or Dutch Harbor, so Alaska. So I said, well, I just want a one-way ticket to Dutch. I don't want a ticket to Seattle. And he says, are you sure? He says, you got to sign paper saying. I said, oh, yeah, I'll sign anything. I'm going to Dutch Harbor. So me and my friend that got fired with me, we flew to Dutch Harbor, started walking the docks, and in less than 3 hours, I had 5 different jobs to choose from. At the time, I had a couple crabbers wanted to scoop me up, and I wanted to get on a dragger. And I ended up at a factory trawler, and one of my friends from high school was on the factory trawler, and they were looking for people. And I wanted to go with my friend. So I said, well, I talked to the captain, and he says, yeah, I'll hire you right now. He says, but I said, well, I want to go on deck. And he says, well, you're not going to start on deck here. He says, I'll tell you what. He says, you do one contract for me in the factory. He said, I guarantee I'll put you on the deck if you come back. And I said, okay, that sounds like a fair deal. Well, it turned out the same company that just fired me 4 hours before that. And back then they didn't have cell phones or nothing. So we get out and we're heading to Akitan from Dutch Harbor, and he sends a telex, and they send him back a message saying, you can't hire this guy. We just fired him 5-6 hours ago. He says, I need bodies. He showed up. He's on my boat. Well, I ended up working on that boat for 4 years. I did one contract running a Pollock machine, and then I went home, and I worked for that captain. I never left that captain. I went home, and then he hired me back. I came back up like 2 weeks later, and he put me right on the deck. And started out as a combi. I did combi for about a month before they made me a full deckhand.
Explain combi, just so.
A combi is a combination processor deckhand. You're basically a deckhand in training. And I did really well. I picked up nets like it was nothing. After a month, I was able to do everything a deckhand could. I could sew net, I could splice wire, splice everything.
You're still known for that today, actually.
Yeah. I'm still pretty sharp with it. But I just picked it up real easy. And then he ended up making me a full deckhand. I finished that contract, went home for a month, came back, and they put me on as deck boss. And I stayed deck boss on that boat for a couple of years. And then one day that captain came to me. He said, he ended up becoming one of my best friends.
What's his name?
Kerry Anderson. he recently passed away last year, but we were like family from then. And a couple of years after I was on that boat, he was talking about going on back on a catcher boat. Wanted to know if I'd go with him, and so I said, "Sure, absolutely, I'm sticking with you." And we ended up going on a 110-foot dragger, and we were working out of Dutch Harbor.
Which one was that?
The Tracy Ann, and we were doing shoreside deliveries then, codfish mostly, fishing out way out west, Adak, that area, and then we ended up doing joint venture with it, which was a lot of fun. I stayed on that boat a couple of years.
Why was joint venture a lot of fun?
Joint venture, you didn't have to put any fish in the hole.
You just drug the bag behind you and handed it off.
Yeah. You would hand it off. We were actually fishing for Golden Alaska at the time. And
she's sitting right there.
Yeah. We were fishing for them and delivering to them. And I love that.
It's kind of like a lateral pass, right?
Yeah.
You just come alongside and essentially throw lines, and
what they do is they'll trail a bag, and we motor up beside them. We grab the bag with a hook, run it through the trawl wrench, wind it up, and then we hook the bag up to that line, and then send the full bag of fish to them. And then they would send us an empty bag, and we'd zip it on and go fishing again. It was great. We were cod fishing, so it was all daylight fishery, and we'd just catch enough in the day to keep that factory trawler working all night long. Mm-hmm. And it was a lot of fun.
Didn't touch shore a lot doing that.
No, we'd come into fuel. At the time, we did hit shore a lot, and that's how I ended up in the engine room. I'd never really wanted to go in the engine room or be a chief, and we kept having minor breakdowns, what I thought at the time. And we went to Dutch one time too many for something stupid that I thought, and I went out to the elbow room and got a little smashed. Came back to the boat, called my chief, everything in the book that you shouldn't. Told him he couldn't fix his way out of a wet paper sack, and then I went and passed out. And the captain woke me up the next morning, and I said, "Way to go, jerk." He said, "You got the chief upset, and he quit this morning and caught a plane to Seattle." So he said, I said, "Well, who are we going to get for a chief?" He says, "You're going to do it."
I said, you started this mess. You're going to fix it.
I said, "I don't know nothing about the engine room." And he says, "Well, you're going to learn." So I ended up in the engine room. And I go, "Well, do I get a raise?" He said, "No." He said, "You still get your deck rate that you were getting." Because I ran the whole deck. And
is this the same skipper?
Yeah.
So he knew you were capable. It wasn't like you.
Yeah, well, he started teaching me the engine room and showing me how to do stuff. And we ended up he ended up going in for back surgery, and he ended up retiring from fishing almost at that time. He wasn't all the way done yet, but he quit, and I stayed on the boat and worked for another guy who was just an awesome fisherman, Dave Wilmore. Phenomenal fisherman, and me and him hit it off really good. And we ended up fishing in Alaska and off the coast of Washington. We did we started fishing off the coast of Washington with that same boat at that point. And shortly after that, after a few months of that, probably about 6 months, Kerry had recovered from his surgery and came back and told me, "Hey man, I got a deal. If you're interested, I've got a boat to take down." It was a 58-footer longliner to take down to California. And the guy's got another boat down there. And he says, "You come with me, get this boat ready." He says, "You'll get the boat when we go down there, and I'll run the other one." And so I took it. And we went down to San Diego, and we had a longline fishery going down there, which was pretty awesome. Because, I went from March in Alaska to 78-degree weather in the springtime.
Shorts.
Yeah. And I'm running the boat. It was an easy job. we had a fresh market deliver every day. So we'd come in the evening, we'd park the boats right downtown San Diego, right on the boardwalk.
Oh, that sounds like trouble.
It was wonderful. I was having a ball.
Well, you were still young then.
Yeah,
right?
I was pretty young, and yeah, it was paradise. And then the guy started talking about sending his boats to South America, and I was going to go, and I got my passport, and then he had I decided at the last minute I didn't want to go, and so I didn't. And it's a good thing I didn't, because I heard that the boats went down there and ended up in Nicaragua and got seized, and it was just a big shit show.
Yeah. Did Kerry go, or?
He was going to go too, and he backed out too.
So you probably backed out because he backed out.
No, I had backed out prior.
Okay.
I'd already made up my mind. I really didn't want to go down there, and then he ended up backing out shortly after. I ended up on a boat tendering the next summer up in Southeast, just for something to do. My dad was passing away at the time, so he was sick, and I didn't want to be gone too long, so I ended up staying home with him, and then I did the summer tendering gig, and then stayed home and worked in through the winter at the shore plant there where I live, and then shortly after that, I ended up back down in California and started my got a CDL, started driving truck, and then did that for a couple of years. Moved back to Astoria and bought my own truck. Started my trucking company where I was hauling seafood up and down 101. I just couldn't get away from fish.
Mm.
It's
You're a fishy motherfucker.
Well, one way or another, I'm always messing with fish.
Yeah.
And
catching it, hauling it,
yeah,
processing it.
That was pretty lucrative for a few years, and I did really well at it. Had quite a few trucks. Did pretty good. And then as times changed, we ended up just the industry kind of took a dive. Fuel prices went through the roof. I ended up just me and my truck bought my own trailer, and I was still hauling seafood. I'd haul different stuff from Oregon down to California, and I'd pick up shrimp and frozen seafood down there. There's a lot of stuff that comes from overseas and bring it back to Oregon. But anyway, I did that for quite a while, and then it all just kind of fell through. And I was sitting at home, I ended up losing my license because
a couple
brewskis hit a deer one night, and that's all it took. And I was sitting at home doing nothing, and Nick had seen me on Facebook and asked, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, I'm sitting at home doing nothing right now." And he goes, "Well, you want to come back up here to Alaska?" I said, "Well, hell yeah." So he goes, "Oh, yeah, I'll make a phone call." So I ended up calling Christian
AC.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Nick called me back, said, "Yeah, Christian's waiting for you to call." So I called him. He said, "Yeah, here's Sonova's number, and I want you to call her right now." So I called her, and she goes, "Yeah, I got a boat I can put you on in about a week, if you can pass the drug test and all that." I said, "Okay."
Isn't that amazing how it changes that quick?
Yeah. And then she called me the next day, and she goes, "Have you ever chiefed?" I go, "Yeah, that's what I've did almost my whole career." And she goes, "Well, good. I need you to leave tomorrow."
Maybe I want a job, and now I got an airplane ticket.
Yeah. So I ended up in Bristol Bay for a summer, and then
on one of the tenders.
Yeah.
Chiefing.
Well, I was on the Far West Leader.
Great boat.
Yeah, it is a good boat.
Excellent platform.
And Greg is a great captain. I liked him. I ended up going back home, take care of all my legal issues after the end of the season, and then I wanted to find something to do up for Trident at the time, and Greg ended up taking me up on a pot cod trip. We did one trip and we're rigging for Opies, and then they were all going to go home because of the weather, and I just got there. I didn't want to spend the airfare. They said, "Well, maybe we can find something for you to be an end fleet." So they ended up. Christian goes, "Yeah, I got a place to put him right now," and they flew me to Kodiak. And when they had just bought the Hazel Lorraine.
Now the Arctic Ram.
which is now the Arctic Ram.
Yeah.
Yes. And Christian had told me when I got on there, he says, "Don't be sad when you see it," which should have been my first warning. And
See, Scott Gillian was the captain then.
yeah, Gilliland.
Gilliland.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that boat was in rough shape.
It was in extremely rough shape. When I showed up, I looked at the boat and I thought, God, I thought I did a good job for these guys. What did I do? And the crew was somewhat kind of hostile because I was from Trident.
They were a brand, we had just bought that.
Yeah, and they were all worried.
I keep saying, wait, Trident had just bought that boat.
Trident had just purchased the boat, and they hadn't even went out yet since Trident had bought it.
The platform was solid, though.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
a good fishing boat. I mean, it had been rode hard, put away wet. The previous owner just, he knew he was going to get out, and he let things go.
Mm-hmm. It's
but
funny you use the analogy of rode hard and put away wet, because Trident is kind of like that company that rides them hard, but they bring them back into the stable and brush them off. You know what I mean? They brush them off and tuck them in.
Right. I mean, it was a good, solid boat. I never felt unsafe on it. When I first got there, the crew was like kind of hostile. They're like, "Oh God, the company spy guy," and which was, no, that's not why I'm here. I mean, I wanted to get on a dragger. That's what I've done mostly, off and on most of my life.
It sounded like when you were in the 80s, you wanted it. That was your first thing, was wanting to get on a dragger.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And after I worked on the factory trawler, I was shooting for the wheelhouse.
So how long were you on the Hazel Lorraine before they sponsored her and changed her name?
We fished it for a little over a year. When I first got on it that winter, we actually had pulled it out of the water, and they did the survey on it, and they ended up starting the Pacific Ram first, and so they were going to put us off.
No, she was a Blue Fox.
No, that's
Northern Ram. That's Northern Ram.
Yes.
Okay.
So we ended up fishing a little over a year as the Hazel Lorraine, and that was a good, solid boat. I did well on it. I made some money on it, and other than, it was a battle fixing things and stuff, just dealing with the shape the boat was in. It didn't have a lot of capacity, so it took a lot of trips to make any money.
Mm-hmm.
But
what was she holding then?
170,000. And but there was a lot of Kodiak fishing, so it was not that far to go out.
Well, they have a cap too, right? I mean, well, granted, 170 was not at the cap, but Kodiak does have a cap.
Yes, they have a 300,000 cap.
So when she was sponsored, she was brought up to be able to carry what?
Over 300. It was actually
perfect Kodiak boat.
Yeah, it was set up when we first sponsored it, we said it was we could put 360 on it.
So to describe what a sponson is, it's widening the boat.
Yes.
Not lengthening it, just widening the boat.
Yeah.
So I think they pushed off 4 or 5 feet either side.
Yeah. Well, that boat, they actually went farther than that. They lengthened it like 7 or 8 feet, and basically they cut the bow.
That's right. They cut the stern off too. Yes. Yeah.
They built a whole new stern for it. I was there for the whole shipyard.
That was at Vigor down in Tacoma. Yeah.
Yeah. We were in shipyard there roughly 9 months.
I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a big job, but it was a good deal.
So they came out of there though with lengthening it and sponsoring and widening it, and did not do anything to the house. So
no,
she was like
the original house.
She was like the big girl now.
Yeah.
With a small head. Like a little tiny head.
Yeah.
And sitting in that wheelhouse, you couldn't really see over the bow.
You couldn't see anything. Yeah.
I mean, if I was driving it, I'd feel like I needed somebody up there to tell me where I was going.
Pretty much. That's exactly how it was. It was so wide you couldn't even see the dock when you're coming up beside it. It was hard to.
Since then, they put that beautiful house on it. I mean,
absolutely gorgeous. At the time, though, it was a big improvement. We ended up over tanked, and we had to come back to shipyard after the first season.
You had a lot of water on the deck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just over tanked.
Explain over tanked.
Over tanked was we were holding way too much fish for the stability of the boat. It didn't have enough flotation. so we reduced the tankage on the side tanks, and that cured the problem. And a stable, you've never been on a more stable, good riding boat though. We never tied down, secured our coffee pot. It was right in the center of the boat, and to this day, I'll bet it's not.
I remember when she first got back and the work was done.
Yeah.
Scott was still running the boat, and he came out here right next to the gale, because he was waiting for the bridge to open. He just did donuts here, and
Yeah.
like came within 5 feet, and just the control of that boat was so.
Yeah, well, the boat has an articulated rudder, and it's extremely. I mean, you can sit there and spin a 360 in one spot with it,
Much like a tugboat.
Yeah,
you know,
it was amazing what you could do with it after that, for as wide as it was. No, great boat.
So we've got you up to the point now where you're on the Arctic Ram.
Yeah.
But before we get into the skippering on the Royal Viking, which is a very pristine and well-known and historical boat in this industry, I want to bring you back to starting in the '78, working the docks, and the first time you were scared. The first time you were scared.
I really was never been scared.
Still, really? Because I can tell you a pucker moment without even.
Yeah, I never really had. I take that back. When I was running that 58 footer, and me and my skipper were going California, we were transiting to California, and we had some thermostats go out in the engine room. I said, "Hey man, we got to fix this." And so we were going into San Francisco at night. We had no local area charts, and so we were just going to follow somebody in. And that was the first time I ever seen Carrie scared, and that kind of worried me because I mean, me and him, we brought boats across the Gulf together, just me and him alone, and we've been in big storms. I was never scared, and but when I seen him turn around and say, "We're in a pickle now," we ended up coming across Potato Patch Shoals, which is a pretty famous spot down there, coming into San Francisco. They call it that because the old boats would hit that, and they'd roll over and lose their cargo of potatoes, and that's why they called it Potato Patch Shoals. And we didn't have a chart, so we're just, hey, I think he went that way, and let's go. And we're trying to get into the bay, and caught it at the wrong tide, and I think in between the swells we were scraping bottom, and
so seeing him scared made you.
Seeing him scared worried me because he turned around. I'll never forget. He turned around, and looked at me, and he goes, "Schmitty, we're in a pickle now." And when I never heard him say that before. Well, we were the two guys that would be drinking espresso when everybody else was down in their bunks going, "Oh."
I got to call you out on this though. I know you've been scared. I know. Well, probably not as much as others, because I actually heard once you took a hook in the face and like just got beat the hell up and was still working on the deck. Yeah. Actually, I think I have a picture of it.
Yeah, that happened on the Arctic. That was just one of those things.
Just one of, yeah. Now, give you guys a little background on Joe. He's a biker.
Yeah.
He's a member of a club, not a bad club, guys. At least not the junior club. But long hair, tattoos all over. Yeah. He'll probably whoop somebody's ass in a minute. But a huge heart.
Yeah.
So where do we go from there? I mean, I don't even know what to talk about next.
Well,
because you don't got any scary stories for me. I know you were scared.
I got some funny stories.
We'll get into funny in a minute, but real quick, I want to talk about the False Pass.
Okay.
You took the Royal Viking,
right?
Which was let's talk about that. How did you become captain of the Royal Viking?
Okay. Well, I'd been on the Arctic Ram, and I was just tired of being on deck, and I didn't mind being in the engine room. I was chief on the Arctic Ram at that point, and I was fishing with Tony, and I love Tony. Tony Kennedy. Me and him got along real well, and guy's an awesome fisherman. And I was making money, but I was just tired of being cold. I'm getting old, and I didn't want to be on deck anymore. And I told Christian before Tony had even got the boat, I'm only going to fish on this boat here, and then I want to do something else. And so Christian, I reminded him of that before it got to that point. He goes, well, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be a chef. I want to go cook on the Arcturus for the
charter.
For the charter. It had like 9 scientists on there in the crew, and I thought, I'd be happy doing nothing but making up grub for everybody, and I'm pretty good at it. So I had plenty of references. Tony was one of them, and so Christian said, you got it. And so my time came up where I finished the season that winter, and I went home in April. Or no, yeah, it was. I'd went home right before April, and the season was over, and it was getting close to summer. So I called Christian up, and I said, "Well, when do I need to come up and start doing purchasing for this gig for the summer?" And he says, "Joe, I don't know how to tell you this." He says, "But this is the first time in like 20 years
we didn't get the charter.
We didn't get the charter." He goes, "I don't know what to do, but what to tell you. You quit your job, and the funny thing is, I had done that charter before Trident got it, and Trident had actually called me back then it was in the early 90s, and they had just got it for the first time, and they were going to hire me because the people from NIMS liked me so much, they wanted me on the boat. And so Trident was going to hire me and I had turned them down at the time because I was doing other things at the time. But Nick had called me and said, yeah, Trident would like to hire you right now. This is their first year of this charter. And the head guy of NIMS had said, we want this guy on your boat if you can get him. And I knew the whole program. I knew the whole gig. So they had called me because they wanted someone that had done it before. And I turned them down. But anyway, so I was bummed out because I thought, man, that would just, and I wanted to work with Nick. Me and Nick were high school buddies.
Skateboarders.
Yeah, we were just best friends when we were in school. And so I was kind of disappointed. And he goes, well, Christian had asked me, he goes, well, is there anything else you want to do? And I said, well, summer's coming. Don't you need a chief somewhere? And he goes, yeah. Matter of fact, I got a perfect place for you. And at the time, Harold had just got sick, or he had been sick.
Big Harold Myrold.
And so they needed someone that could run the engine room. And they were putting Jeff Boddington on there as captain for that season.
Of the Royal Viking.
And so they hired me as chief for that. So, I had just got home 2 weeks prior, and I was actually up here on my anniversary with my wife when he offered me the spot. And I went and looked at the boat. And oh, yeah, this would be great.
She's a beautiful boat.
Yeah, it's a beautiful boat. It's a 108 Marco. I love it. And, it's kind of funny.
Someone argue it's 109, but yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because a couple of years prior to that, I was on the Hazel Lorraine. I think it was still the Hazel then. And I was in Kodiak fishing, and I seen the boat go by, and I went, man, that is so pretty. I wouldn't mind being on that boat.
She's a pretty boat.
Yeah. And so I jumped at the chance for that. I go, heck yeah, that'll be a good way to spend the summer. And I ended up really enjoying myself, and I thought, this is perfect. It's the amount of time that I want to work. We ended up working really late. A month into the season, Jeff Boddington went to the Sovereignty, and they put Tom on there as captain. And Tom was a good guy. He was a good friend.
Tom.
Yeah.
What's his last name? Oh, we got to look it up.
LaPointe.
Oh, that's right. Tom LaPointe.
Tom LaPointe. Yep. And me and Tom hit it off really good. And Tom had went to Alaska the same year I did from the East Coast, 1988. And he had been he used to run a big drag there. And just a great guy.
So now he's doing his retirement gig, running the...
Well, no, they actually, Westward had shut his boat down and is sitting over there by Pack Fish right now. And they retired that boat. And so he just didn't have a boat to go to. And so Trident scooped him up, put him on the Southern Wind because he had a big license. Well, then they ended up moving him to Royal Viking because Jeff was going to the Sovereignty. And so they had Tom finish the summer on the Royal Viking. And I chiefed for him. And then we ended up going back to Kodiak at the end of the season, salmon season. And they put us to work doing cod. We ended up not even getting home till the middle of October or the end of October, which was everything I didn't want to do. I only want to work 4 or 5 months a year now. It's I could do it. My wife's got a decent job.
You got a motorcycle to ride.
Yeah, I want to be home now. And anyway, we did that gig with Tom, and then we ended up staying home. And then he calls me up in February and says they want the boat up there right now to do cod. They want to fly us up. Can you go? I said, heck yeah, let's go. And so we all ended up going up and doing cod in February up into March. And we finished that. It was about a 7-week season. And then we all went home. And I really liked the boat. I liked the crew. And I liked Tom. I mean, it was just a place made in heaven. It was the amount of time I wanted. I was making decent money and not working too much. And then we went up the next summer and started our salmon season. And Tom was on the boat for 1 month. We had just got to Prince William Sound a couple days before that. We had been working at Kodiak. And then I was down in the engine room. I talked to him. I went down in the engine room and to do whatever I was doing in the engine room, which I'm always down there. So I got an alarm. And I walked up and I go, well, I'm down here. There's nothing wrong. And I walked up and I looked at my board and there's nothing lit up on my board. And then it dawned on me, the only other thing that could set that alarm off is a watch alarm. And I went out the engine room door and me and Big Steve met right there at the door and started heading up the stairs. And we went up the stairs and found Tom on the floor. And he had had an apparent heart attack or something like that. And we got him stretched out, started CPR. I took over the boat, started calling the Coast Guard. And by then, the other crew had got up, and they were working on him. And I took the boat in, made the distress call, talked to the Coast Guard. And we were kind of right in the middle between, kind of halfway between Cordova and Valdez. So they were coming out of Valdez, so I headed for Valdez. And we worked on him all the way until the Coast Guard they came out with a fast boat, put a medic on board, and they worked on him for another half hour and pronounced him dead. So, which was pretty devastating to me. He was a good friend. I talked to him 10 minutes before that. And so we're sitting at the dock at Valdez, and they got Tom off the boat. And Christian called him.
You guys, the Coast Guard offered to take him off the boat, but you guys said you're going to keep him. Is that right?
No. They had us
worked on him all the way in.
Yeah, they worked on him for about a half hour, and they had me keep heading towards Valdez, and they followed us with a little fast boat.
Mm-hmm.
And then after about a half hour, they just said, "This isn't doing it. He's gone." So I went ahead and took him to the dock in Valdez, and we got him off the boat, and Harley was there, Steve Davidson. And he says, "I really need this boat to work tomorrow. Can you run it?" I said, "Well, it's not up to me. That's kind of up to Christian." Christian called me a half hour later and says, "Do you want the job?" I said, "Yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't I?"
What a terrible way to get it.
Yeah.
I mean,
and see,
especially from a friend.
The sad thing was they had told me when they found another place for Tom, they were going to give me the boat anyway. Sam had told me, and John Halliam.
Oh, when they found a place for him.
Yeah, because he had a big license and he was a trawler. That's what he wanted to do.
They were going to put him on the next big thing.
Yeah, he wanted to go fishing, and that was just a spot for him to be until they got a spot for him. Mm-hmm. And so I was pretty bummed out about it, though, because he was my friend. And next day, I started running the boat.
And been doing it since.
Been doing it ever since. I'm on my 4th year now. And I love the boat.
It's a fucking amazing boat.
It is an amazing boat. It's great.
We're getting pressed for time here. Okay. So one thing I want to know before we go is what would you suggest for young guys trying to get in? I mean, they can't go to Dutch in 3 hours and get 5 job offers anymore.
No, young guys with no experience. coming into the tender fleet is pretty simple. And like I've sent a few guys off my boat already to the catcher fleet. If I get a young guy that's the right kind of person for that job, and if they're showing the ambition to learn, I'm willing to teach them anything. And I've sent like 3 different people.
Didn't you work with Zach on teaching him net? Teaching him how to repair nets?
Oh, I showed him how to sew. I showed him how to splice. There's not so much sewing anymore with the midwater gear. Not like the old days with the bottom gear. Bottom gear, you would be sewing constantly. I mean, it was just about every set you were going to fix something. Nowadays, there's more. It leans more towards the midwater fishery, where there's less, and just the way the nets are designed now, there's a lot less sewing. It's
but guys that can repair nets are valuable.
Yeah, but all the skills that go along with that. It's not just sewing web. It's putting bars in, knowing how to identify the net and identify what part it is and what's messed up with it is a big part of it. Simple stuff, benzoline, you still do that. That's everywhere.
Yeah. Google, you guys Google a pollock net coming up on board, and you'll see like what appears to be 1,000 different lines and different colors and different streamers and different.
Right.
But these guys on deck can identify what each part of that is.
Yeah, exactly.
As it's coming up, and when you first look at it, you're going to be very confused because it does appear to be
it
like
looks like a
lines.
wad of yarn going out.
And you're just there. So the suggestion is tender fleet. It's a really good start too because it's summer. It's calmer. Yeah. You're not in really heavy seas unless you're in the Noosh.
Yeah.
It's pretty controlled environment.
Yeah, it's if they can do a good job on a tender and they get used to the idea of being out on the water, not hitting the beach, not being able to go out and do what they want, being gone from home that long. So like my seasons usually last at least 60 or more days, usually up to 90, and just getting used to the lifestyle. And if they can handle that and handle being out on the open water,
no internet, no Facebook, no
exactly, exactly. And I've had lots of guys. Oh, I want to go crabbing. I want to go dragging. I want to get on a fishing boat. But when I say, hey man, I'm going to be splicing some line today. Who wants to learn? And they don't want to come up and learn. I'd rather watch a TV movie or go down and play grab ass on the deck. Well, you don't really want to go fishing, do you? But the guys that do, like Zach, I knew I wanted to keep him the day I got him on there. We were in Kodiak and we went down to the south side, and it was crappy. For a summer, it was just a crappy day. And I'm looking out my camera and I see him on deck and he's out there just harfing away. And I walk down to check on him and tell him, hey, stay away from the rails. And I go, how you doing, man? Oh, pretty sick. I said, what I always did when I was young and I'd get sick, which I never did get sick in my whole life. I said, I'd dance a jig, get used to the motion of the boat. And I walked up to my pilot house and I'm sitting there watching him in the camera and he starts dancing a jig. And I go, I'm keeping that guy. He'll do anything to stay here.
He's that guy. He's that guy. He will do whatever he's told to do.
No, he's a great kid, man. I love that kid.
We're definitely out of time at this point. But before we go, I will extend this episode a little bit if you give me one wild story from Dutch Harper in the early 70s or 80s. You got one. Because if anybody that's been on this show has got one, you got one.
I've got a million of them, but none of them are really wild. I mean, just the way things were back then, it was a different world.
Well, let's talk about that. How are the way things were back then?
Well, back then, the turnover was so great, especially on the factory trawlers. It was a brutal world. They would go out and recruit people from Midwestern towns that had never seen a lake.
From Nebraska, man.
Yeah, and they'd put them on these boats, telling them they're going to get rich, and they forget to tell them that it's 16-hour shifts, 7 days a week. You're going to be, in cold, wet, miserable. The boat's moving. You're going to be seasick. I used to like getting people seasick. When I was young, I used to think it was funny as hell to watch somebody harfing. I had one guy get on the boat, and he was about 4'6", and I swear to God, he was bigger around than he was tall. And he's wearing a set of $400 snakeskin cowboy boots. So I asked him when he come up in the galley, I said, "You ever been on a boat before?" And he says, "Yeah, I rode across Lake Washington once." Cool, you're going to fit right in here. Well, we headed out from Dutch to go do our trip. Our trips were averaging about 20, 24 days then for that boat. And we headed out, and he started feeling a little woozy. And I told him, I said, "The worst thing you can do is go to your room." And he went anyway. So I did what I always did when we get new guys. I took a big green cigar that I had, a big cheap one.
Oh,
I
no.
walked down to his room, and I cracked his door open, and I lit it up and started blowing cigar smoke in his room. And I stood there by the door listening. And I heard this, "Oh!" Well, the two other guys come walking by. "What are you doing?" All right, check this out. This is pretty funny. And we threw the door open. He's got one of them snakeskin Tony Llama boots, and he's filling it. So from that day on, his nickname was Tony Llama.
Nice.
Yeah. So we had this little fat guy ended up doing his whole 90, because then contracts were 90 days. It was brutal. By the end of 90 days, you were beat.
Mm-hmm.
And he did his whole 90-day contract. And I never thought he'd make it a week.
My first contract in 92 was 90 days.
Yeah.
And it was rough.
It was rough. And the funniest thing was after he got his boat name, which was Tony Llama, he finishes his contract. He's going to Dutch Harbor Airport to get a plane home. And he goes in to check in, and they don't have a ticket for him. He goes, "Well, what do you mean? I'm supposed to have a ticket."
Put it down as Tony Llama?
Yeah, the captain didn't know his name wasn't Tony Llama, because that's what everybody called him. There was a reservation for Tony Llama. This little guy ended up going home for like a month. He came back for another season and did it again. Nice. I mean, that was the funniest thing back then. You never knew who was going to make it.
Well, I tell you.
Yeah.
We're way over time at this point, but before we go, going to encourage everybody to eat wild Alaska seafood.
Oh, absolutely. I live on it.
Catch it wild.
Yeah.
Wild pollock is becoming a big thing.
Pollock is good fish, man. Yeah.
It's like a young cod.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, I keep it in my freezer all the time. I actually buy the Trident Ultimate fish sticks. My grandkids eat them every day. I can make those. My wife eats them. And she's picky. She's not.
I'm going to say Trident's not paying us for this.
No.
But the Alaska wild fish sticks.
Oh,
the best. You can literally microwave them.
Yeah.
And they're still crispy.
Oh, yeah. I make fish sandwiches.
John Sally, if you're listening, you owe me some money for that one. All right, guys. This has been another installment of Galley Stories. Joe, do you have anything to say before we finish this up?
No. Just keep doing what I'm doing, man. I'm where I want to be right now, and I'm going to stay on this boat till they carry me off. That's my retirement.
Yeah. Well, you got big shoes to fill. I mean, Harold.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right, guys. Again, another installment of Galley Stories. Reach out to us at mark@galleystories.net or just galleystories@gmail.com. Any questions, comments, suggestions, or offers for money. That'd be great. We'll talk to you guys later. And again, it's been Galley Stories. I'm your host, Mark Kaler. We'll see you next time.